stinky, resilient Mothman and his brother with anger issues. Gone. Fourth planet Titanic mech of the Grim Reaper. Dead. Extra thick, chubby unicorn armor. Banished. Girlymans Glorious Rowboat. This video is sponsored by Hey Gears. One of my favorite things about 3D printing, my Warhammer hobby, is the creative and often silly or downright hilarious names artists come up with to skirt IP conflicts. But all too often, these names aren't enough to save them, and these awesome models still find themselves expunged by Big Bad's legal inquisition. But that's not the only reason a model can disappear. Sometimes there are other factors at play that can lead an author to pull their models. Maybe they want to change the direction for their brand and distance themselves from those earlier designs. Or maybe they just want to get out of the business completely. There's probably loads of reasons really why it might be possible to buy a model one day and impossible the next, and whatever the reason here, Girlymans Glorious Rowboat and sadly all other models in this range from this creator are gone. If you Google the name, you'll find some useless links with some renders, maybe some photos from those who have printed it before, but good luck to you tracking these files down yourself. For all intents and purposes, Girlymans Glorious Rowboat has been lost to time, living now only as files on the drives of those lucky enough to have bought it and on the shelves of those bold enough to have printed it. Now, fortunately for me, I was one of the people who received these files a long time ago now, I believe as a loyalty reward if I recall correctly, and that was for supporting this artist a number of months in a row on Patreon. And I don't know if it was the hilarious name that still puts a big stupid grin on my face, or just how freaking cool this model looks, or maybe just my love of Space Marines. But this one's been on my to-do list since the moment I first laid eyes on it, and so I guess as a kind of bittersweet farewell to this model and all others like it from this author, I can at least today print up and paint this incredible pillar of the Imperial fleet and give this ship one final day in the sun. Now, if you do happen to recognize this model and you know who the author is, I would kindly request that you do not pester them for the files. They have decided to make them unavailable for their own reasons, and we should all respect that. I have conferred with them. They do not wish to be bothered. These files are gone. Or are they? If you stick around to the end of this video, I may just have secured a way for you too to get Girlymans Glorious Rowboat. So stick around. This grand interstellar vehicle, of course, belongs to no other than Reboot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, and such a mighty and prestigious ship could only be crafted by the most powerful forge. And so it is my great delight today to introduce you to the new Hey Gears Ultracraft Reflex RS. Now, full disclosure and quick reminder, this is a sponsored video, and that means Hey Gears have paid me to debut and showcase their latest and greatest here for you, so please keep that in mind. This is an advertisement and not a review, but don't worry, I will have a couple of independently produced videos about Hey Gears and their products soon, so if you'd like to hear my unfiltered thoughts on the Hey Gears ecosystem, then do make sure you're subscribed for that if you're not already. Also, like this video and drop a comment, any comment. Warp Demon stole my baby. This video is heresy. Whatever you want to do, it really helps me out. Alright, let's get this thing plugged in, powered on, configurated and lubricated, and print ourselves a spaceship worthy of a Primarch. First things first, we need to bring our files into Blueprint Studio, which is Hey Gears Slicer, to prepare our files for printing. The original files have come pre-supported, but rather than try my luck with these ancient sticks, I wanted to hand over control to Hey Gears to put their automatic software to the test. And so for that, I will need the raw files with no supports attached at all. Now, unfortunately for me, I just haven't got those. But that's not too big a hurdle. A few minutes in Blender, and these were actually pretty simple to separate out from their supports. And if you want to know how to do this too, I've thrown together a quick video guide, and you can find that link down below. So with these models now returned to their original form, free from supports, I can now go ahead and load them into the slicer right after we tell it which printer we're using and with which resin. I've actually got two brand new resins here to choose from. The first is Pour 10 a water washable resin, which they tell me has a low water absorption rate, helping it to maintain excellent surface finish and dimensional accuracy over time. And it's also the fastest printing resin in the RS lineup, with durability close to oil-based resins. I printed up a few things in this resin, like this great big orc here and a bunch of miniatures, and yeah, I have to say the performance is quite impressive and I like this a lot. This would be a suitable choice if using oil-based resins is not an option in your environment. However, the other new resin on the block is PAS 10 resin, a standard modeling resin with a lower price that offers good performance for our tabletop miniatures, and this here will be the resin that I am going with today to print the Glorious Rowboat in. And Haygears are getting really competitive here because PAS 10 resin is only going to run you just $32.99 for a 1,000 gram bottle, which really makes this a compelling option whether you have a Haygears printer to go with it or not. Now, quick side note, my bottle here does say PARP 10, but Haygears assures me this is in fact PAS 10, that they are identical resins with the exact same formulation. They've just altered the packaging and name for marketing reasons. Basically, they want you to think of this as a modeling resin, not a prototyping resin. I personally think Haygears should just ditch the acronyms entirely and give us some more fun and descriptive names like Tabletop Miniatures Resin or Display Painters Resin. With our PAS 10 resin loaded up and ready to print, I spent a little bit of time arranging my models about the plate in Blueprint Studio and orienting them in what I thought would give the best results. The slicer is of course capable of automatically choosing a print orientation for you, but I don't recommend that. It's not quite there yet, but yeah, that's for another video. For now, I simply clicked on automatic supports and had Blueprint generate them all for me. This is done pretty quickly, and with that I can now wirelessly send the print job to the new Ultracraft Reflex RS over my local network before starting the print at the printer. I chose the 30 micron layer height print profile for this job, and in total it took about 16 hours to complete, and I was really pleasantly surprised by just how low odor this new PAS 10 resin is. I still had the room extremely well ventilated, of course. Always ensure you have good airflow and ventilation when resin 3D printing indoors. PPE as well. Safety, safety, safety. Let's now take a look at the results. So Blueprint Studio's auto supports are pretty impressive. Nothing failed and everything is here on the plate. And Haygears have really dialed in the build plate adhesion nicely on this one because these parts held well and were a dream to remove. But after getting these parts washed and I began on the support removal, I noticed that not everything had gone quite to plan. There were these really prominent and horrible layer lines that I would never expect to see on a resin print. Like here on the prow, they're really obvious. Like, what the hell could be causing these? Here as well on that long center column piece, you can see them really clearly again. But not just that, these parts, despite a thorough washing, were leaking uncured resin and had this almost like a thin, mushy membrane all throughout their interior. So what went wrong? Well, it's never fun to admit it, but this was user error. Completely my fault, because I neglected to run any kind of auto repair on these models before printing them, and everything we see here is due to errors in the meshes, essentially confusing the slicer and giving us a bad output. How do I know this? Because simply fixing the errors and printing the plate again was a complete success. Well, there was one slightly unusual result here. This is pretty funny actually, because it completely obliterated one part of the ship, reducing it to a debris field, which, I don't know, that's just so fitting. So for that one, I ended up repairing it using Microsoft's 3D Builder, the undefeated king of one-click auto repair. Alright, so for this reprint, I also chose to switch it over to the 50 micron layer height print profile, largely just to save time. But I was also curious to see if I'd be able to tell them apart from the 30 micron prints. And maybe these aren't the best models for it, but can you tell which is which? Once again, we had a completely successful print. Everything was present on the plate, so good job, automatic supports. Removal from the plate was buttery smooth, but here's where we encounter another problem. Well, maybe not so much a problem, more so just an inevitable outcome. Because the thing about automatic supports is they're just never going to give you the results as good as had the files been manually supported by someone with experience. Now, it's amazing that HeyGears have an automatic supports engine that works out of the box with basically a near 100% success rate. But the way it gets there is by sheer brute force and a disregard for fine details. These models are absolutely littered with countless supports, which, as I was standing there slowly and painstakingly removing, I couldn't help but grow increasingly more dismayed as I watched the print quality suffer for all these little nicks and marks left behind by the support tips. Some sides of the supports had even bonded to the models, destroying details too, and some areas were so clogged up with supports that the details were lost entirely. And I even found at least one spot where no supports had been placed at all, where they absolutely should have been. And so this edge right here essentially tore itself apart as it lacked the bracing needed to ensure its proper formation. So given all this support scarring and the absolute tedium of removing them all, I figured it would be a good idea to just manually support all these models myself and run off one final print. So I fired up Lychee, my favorite application for manual support work, and spent the next couple of hours doing just that. I then bought my new pre-supported models into Blueprint, arranged them about the plate, and begun my third and final print of Girlymans Glorious Rowboat. And man, what awaited me next on the printer's build plate was just pure joy. I was absolutely stoked to see these parts printed great, everything was present, we had no print failures, and popping the models off the plate was a breeze, and all the supports came away beautifully, leaving very minimal scarring, and there wasn't a single support more than necessary, and zero tedium in their removal. This was so fast and effortless, just pure 3D printing bliss. I tell you, give me a well-prepared, pre-supported model any day against the best auto supports in the world. It's just such a good experience. But okay, not everything was perfect. There was a bit of human error slipped through. I did miss a couple of islands, same as the auto supports, and so these small ledges here suffered for it. But overall, these are superior results in my opinion. To be clear, the auto supports by Blueprint are phenomenal. And it's really where this whole HeyGears ecosystem shines. Like the fact that I did not need to calibrate my normal layer exposure value or bottom layer exposure value. And with just a couple of clicks, I can completely prepare any 3D model for printing with an extremely high level of confidence that that model will be present in whole on my build plate at the end of the print, which, yeah, is amazing. This is like when you print anything in FDM by just enabling tree supports and hitting go. Really, really cool. But it is a brute force method, like tree supports. It's going to just jam up your details. It's far from perfect. It's going to take you a long time to post-process your prints, pulling all those supports off, versus a professionally prepared pre-supported file. So that's the trade-off here. And HeyGears have told me that their target audience for this machine and their ecosystem is designers. And that makes perfect sense, because if I was designing miniatures or other tabletop gaming related STL files intended for resin printers, I'd want to be able to first hold the designs in my hands before I commit the time and resources to having those final deliverable pre-supported files prepared. That way I can first make sure that everything is just right. Is this part too thin? Does this joint fit together? These are the sorts of things that it's a good idea for an artist or studio to test print first before giving it that final sign-off. So for this use, the finish doesn't have to be perfect. We don't care too much about excessive support scarring. We just need to know quickly and efficiently, how is this thing at this stage of its design when made real in our physical world? So with that in mind, and before we assemble and paint up Girlymans Glorious Rowboat, let's talk about this new HeyGears Ultracraft Reflex RS 3D printer for designers and see what's new compared to last year's model. The RS comes in a smaller and lighter package over last year's Reflex, with an improved build volume sporting an 8K screen for sub 30 micron XY resolution. I'll spare you the nitty gritty technical details. They don't really matter, to be honest. What I think matters when talking about resin 3D printers is features, like heated vats. Well, on this one, they've made the heated vat an optional extra, which I think is smart. Why spend the extra if you don't need it? But having said that, there's also plenty of room in here for other heating options too. So with the new RS, you're good on that front. The build plate is a hefty, solid steel, laser-etched thing with a new latching mechanism that locks into place confidently and securely. I like this a lot, and also compared to last year's model, it is much easier to hold onto and maneuver this build plate around. This is a serious day-to-day quality of life improvement, if you ask me. Last year's was just awkward as hell to hold onto. The RS also downsizes the touchscreen on the front, but in no way have I found that to be a hindrance. It's nice and bright and responsive and pretty well laid out and intuitive. You've got wireless network connectivity to remotely send print jobs to the printer, and there's a load sensor built in here which will save your ass, as it saved mine. My very first print, which was a bunch of miniatures, was not 100% successful, and I actually failed to notice that, and without the force sensor, there's a good chance that my follow-up print would have caused damage. But thankfully the printer detected that rogue debris and stopped the print so I could then run a vat clean and try again without issue. Love me a printer with a load sensor. You've also got automatic fill, which is where you can load these fancy resin bottles into the back of the machine like a cartridge. They have a fancy lid with a spring-loaded ball in there that lets you completely invert the bottle without dumping resin everywhere. You can also completely remove the lid to fill it back up. Speaking of cool features, check out that pour spout. That's pretty good, huh? Well, if you're more patient than I am, it is. Speaking of impatient YouTubers, this printer is also faster than last year's model, thanks in part to these new resins and their pre-tuned print profiles. Haygears are claiming a peak speed of 4.5 seconds per layer, with an average speed of 7 seconds per layer, versus last year's speeds of 6.6 and 12 respectively. They've also changed the light source on this one, increasing the wavelength from 385 nanometers up to 405 nanometers, and Haygears tells me that this allows them greater printing precision, which makes this machine and these resins even better suited to our tabletop hobby. And this printer, like last year's model, comes factory leveled, so no need to fuss about with that out of the box. And if you do need to manually level it, you can. Best of all though, over last year's model is the price. So the early bird price, if you order one now, is $7.99. But because you're lucky and you're watching my video about it, you can get yourself an extra $50 off if you use my link down below. Remember, this is a closed ecosystem, and that does come with some caveats, but I will talk more about those in an upcoming video. For now, if you've already been thinking seriously about buying into this ecosystem, I reckon this is the model to get, especially if you're a designer. Bigger print volume, faster speeds, easier to fit into your studio, completely pre-tuned resin print profiles, and reliable auto supports. Smart technologies like that load sensor helping to make sure you don't mistakenly break the thing. Yeah, it's solid. I actually do like this one a lot, and I can recommend it if you're cool with the whole walled garden thing. But again, paid shill, grain of salt, etc, etc. After curing these up, assembly was a breeze. Everything fit together great. Well, almost everything. The prow has an index pin thing on it that was too fat or misshapen to fit the receiving slot on that long column piece. But thankfully this PAS 10 resin is pretty forgiving, and so I was able to cut away that pin and make that connection well. I gotta say, putting this together at long last, especially after a couple of false starts, was incredibly satisfying. But I did make one small blunder. The engines at the back here unfortunately set a little too high, so I didn't get a good alignment there. Hopefully no one notices. Wait, why am I pointing this out? I bet no one would have noticed. My copy of the Rowboat files sadly did not include a base, but that's okay because it gave me a chance to practice my Blender skills a bit, and so I set about designing a simple two-part base that can be press-fit and glued together later, and it takes advantage of the layer direction to maximize the strength of the thing as much as possible, hence the flat cutaway for printing straight on the bed. This took a few off-camera tries to nail the fit, and I did this on FDM of course because, well, I just like FDM printing my bases a lot, especially when it comes to very bespoke bases like this one. And you know what? I think it's time to paint this thing. And I won't lie, I'm pretty intimidated. This is a gorgeous model with a ton of detail, but also I've never painted something this scale before. I definitely have a comfort zone with painting gaming pieces. Like, I love my speed painting techniques like slap chop and oil washes. And you know what? Why break the mold today? I'm slap chopping this thing. Let's see how it goes. I figured going the dry brush route for the highlight would lend itself to a gritty and hand-drawn kind of look like we see from that amazing old Battlefleet Gothic artwork. And so after laying down a black primer over this thing, that's exactly what I did. And already I am loving this decision. I was skeptical that dry brushing this model was a good idea, but given the sheer volume of tiny raised details present here, this quickly started to look freaking awesome, and we haven't got any color on there yet. Speaking of color, blue and gold, right? Or blue and yellow? Definitely blue and gold. I already have a fantastic recipe for exactly that, and I don't need to overcomplicate things for myself here today if I can avoid it. I think this ship is going to look sick if I use the same scheme I used back when I did my Thousand Suns. I realize that might be heresy, but what? You can't stop me. So to start things off, we need Raging Sea Blue speed paint, and the quickest way to get this paint onto the spaceship is going to be with the airbrush. But I ran into two small hurdles here. One, these bloody speed paints all jam up on me after they've been sitting a while, so I had to unjam it using this metal poker thingy. And two, I guess I didn't clean out my airbrush thoroughly enough last time I had used it because I had a little bit of spattering. So that's kind of annoying, but I wasn't too bothered by this. It's just extra texture, alright? So anyway, I just continued to hose this paint on. And remember, this is a speed paint, so it does have to go on in excess to get that desired shading effect. Otherwise, it will just act like a filter. And so with that done, it's onto the first step in our most lustrous of gold recipes. Vallejo metal color, gunmetal. Now, not gonna lie, here's where the painting got a bit tedious. I'm not sure how many hours this took, but it definitely dragged on a bit. I wanted to make sure I stayed inside the lines, and I found it really tough to decide which parts should eventually be gold and which should stay blue. There's loads of spires all over the model, for instance, and some of them are shaped kind of like crystals, and others are a lot taller and sparse with rounded edges. I just assumed they're all ridiculously large towers with people and all manner of rooms inside, and so eventually I decided I would designate the taller, rounded ones as the more refined and upper-class areas for the nobility and command of the ship. So they all got a coat of gunmetal, and the crystal-like spires, all clustered together, I figured would be the more common areas for crew and troops and so on. And so I left those blue. But the most time-consuming part of this step was just the insane amount of tiny little cannons and archways all over this thing. Not to mention all of the big primary weapons, engines, and of course that glorious eagle-headed prow. Once that was all finally done, it's time for the next step in the process, sand golem. And deciding which parts should eventually be gold was a lot easier, I found. The most iconic feature of this ship, without a doubt, is that eagle-headed prow, and so this absolutely 100,000% needs to be gold. Also, all the little archways and all the raised patterning that decorates the broad, flat surfaces toward the back of the ship, and of course the spires, all gold, or brown, really, for now. We'll come back soon and get these details shining like gold. I decided that not all the metallic details would end up being gold, and for these I have another speed paint in mind. Gravelord Grey. Is there a paint job on this channel since I got speed paints that doesn't feature Gravelord Grey? I'm not sure. I went about applying this stuff extremely liberally to all the remaining metallic details, like the massive array of weapons on either side of the prow, and all those little cannons that run the length of the ship on the top and down both sides, as well as the machinery-looking stuff on the bottom, and of course those massive engines on the back, and all the little recessed, greebly-looking things. This had the effect of really dulling everything down, but also it added a bunch of lovely contrast to these parts, shading all of those recesses and making the raised details pop. But with all the metallic parts now either brown or very dull, how do we bring them back up? How do we make that gold sparkle like gold and the gunmetal shine like silver? And the answer, of course, is edge highlights with Vallejo metal color silver. It's so stupidly simple and looks so good. I don't think I'll ever bother trying to learn NMM when TMM can look this good, this fast. Well, never say never though, right? I mean, one day I'm sure I'll give it an honest go. But for now, all I'm doing here is just some simple edge highlights, running my brush as best I can along each detail to give it that glorious shimmer. For the spires, I made sure to hit them from a couple of different angles, so no matter which way you look at this model from, you're likely to catch a bit of that silver shine. And then finally, to finish this thing off, painted up that base in a nice matte black. Okay, it's good, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just being hard on myself, but I feel like it could be better. I think I got to do more edge highlights. I don't think this is enough. What do you reckon? Should I do it? Should I do the blue? Oh God, there's so many small details. But if I do it, if I come in here and I don't know, I do like a ice blue or something, it'll be sweet, I reckon. It'll be so sweet. Oh, but then I don't want to touch my setup because I haven't finished writing the rest of the script for this video. So I'm going to have to tear all this down, film painting this, and then when I set back up again, it's not going to be the same. It's going to be different. I like this setup. That's okay. Let's just have a moment's silence for this wonderful shot that we're never going to see again in this exact way. Actually, you know what? Let's just do this right here, right now. I got my wet palette. I got some Deep Sky Blue by Vallejo. Fresh brush. Super glad I did that. It's subtle, but I think with the extra light blue edge highlights, the end result here is really nice. I did end up mixing a bit of that Raging Sea blue in to get the highlight color into the right sort of range, and yeah, I'm stoked with this result. But I can't help but feel a little bit sad knowing that this and other models like it are at risk now of becoming lost forever. At the end of the day, these models are works of art with countless hours of inspired craftsmanship, dedication, and love poured into each piece. And every time someone prints and paints it themselves, they're collaborating in that artwork too. But maybe it's more accurate to say that these files and others like it aren't really gone or dead. They've just been pushed underground, harder to find now unless you know where to look. Because obviously once something has been put online, it's very hard to remove it completely. But again, good luck to you if you do go searching. You know the name of this one, so maybe it will be easier. But what about all the models we don't know the names for? If there's no easy way to find something, does it even really exist at all? I'm reminded of a really fantastic video that I saw recently by another channel in another category. And it was about tracking down a piece of old computer software called Archie that was thought to be lost to time. They did eventually find it, but it wasn't easy and there was a lot of dead ends along the way. That video is by The Serial Report, and I'll leave a link down below where you can check it out if you like. It's a really interesting watch, and it really serves to highlight how just because something is digital and easily replicable, that doesn't ensure its longevity at all. And just like physical media that's gone out of print, digital media can disappear forever too, if we're not careful to maintain it. As for Girlymans Glorious Rowboat, however, if you've made it this far, I've got some really good news. While it has been unavailable officially since April this year, I have been in touch with the team behind this model, and they have very generously agreed to make these files available for viewers of this very video, completely free of charge, which is, yeah, amazing. So there's going to be a link down below where you can grab it now, but please understand, this does not mean the author will return to making models like this. It does not mean any of the other files they've taken down will be brought back. This is a one-off. Do not pester them for anything more. This is it. So of course, huge thank you to the author who wishes to remain anonymous. They didn't have to do this, but here you go. Girlymans Glorious Rowboat is yours too if you want it, free of charge. Big thanks as well to Hey Gears for sponsoring this video. Follow the link down below where you can order yourself a brand new Ultracraft Reflex RS, along with some of that lovely PAS 10 or POR 10 water washable resin, and enjoy yourself a nice $50 discount on that order as well. These products are awesome, and both the resins are really impressive. The water washable one does have a bit of a strong odor to it, so fair warning on that one. But yeah, Hey Gears makes some really quality gear and materials. You will not be disappointed. Thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you back here soon.